The last few years, the COVID affected years have been defined by these big financial institutions, central banks, and the like. So thinking back to your time dealing with them in the mid 2010s, what did you learn about those financial institutions, the European Central Bank, the big private banks, the IMF, and the like?
Oh, the private banks went bankrupt in 2008. The only thing that they cared for was that the state and the central bank in the United States, in Australia, not so much in Australia, you didn't have the same problem, thankfully, in the European Union, in the United Kingdom and so on, that they refloat them, that they print enough trillions to refloat them. Once that happened, by 2009, 2010, 2012 in Europe, it was all done. So the private banks had been saved from their own hubris with taxpayers' money and central bank money. Okay, from that moment onwards, private bankers were not in the picture. They don't give a damn. They're out of it. And they are completely, they're like, zombified by the central banks. They are connected. There is a tube connecting them to the ECB, to the Fed and so on. The ECB, the Fed keep pumping money into them. Commercial banks are not even interesting institutions anymore, right? They're not players. They're not agents in this game. But what happened was that once central banks, primarily the Fed and the European Central Bank and the Bank of England, once they refloated finance, once they did that which never happened after the 1929 collapse of Wall Street, because after 1929, the banks went to the wall. They closed. The difference between 2008 and 1929 was this, that was the one difference. The bankers were saved. But to be saved, the balance sheet of central banks expanded magnificently, lots of money printing, quantitative easing is the official polite term. At that moment, central banks became hostages to conglomerates and to QE. It's not an addiction. It's a reality. Since 2009, let's say April 2009, when this global refloating based on central bank money began. Remember, governments are fiscally stressed. Central banks print as if there is no tomorrow. This means money markets have been doing magnificently, because, take COVID. COVID was not nothing new. COVID simply exacerbated what was happening before. Because how did the West, the North Atlantic countries, Europe, America, and Britain, how did they respond to COVID? They did more of the same. They printed more money, right?
Yeah.
And threw it at the problem. Well, fine. But the problem has been for 13 years now that because of austerity, universal austerity, fiscal austerity, and socialism for financial markets, because that's what it is, the state printing money and giving it to the financiers, that's socialism for the financiers. So austerity for the people and socialism for the financiers created a very unbalanced situation. In particular, never before have we had so much money sloshing around in the financial sector. Never before in the history of the world. At the same time, if you compare the amount of money sloshing around the financial sector with the real investment in fixed capital formation, okay? It's like that. So investment is demand for money. Liquidity is supply for money. When supply massively exceeds demand, what happens? The price keeps falling. And that's the interest rate. That's why we have, still today, as we speak, as you and I are speaking today, the rate of interest of the European Central Bank overnight is minus 0.7% when inflation is 10%. Yeah. Right? Now, why is this happening? Because they can't do otherwise. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. If they increase interest rates in accordance with the rate of inflation, Italy will go bust. Because the whole of the Italian debt is being serviced by negative interest rates. Italy is bankrupt, Greece is bankrupt, Spain is bankrupt. We're all bankrupt, right? And it's only extending and pretending by the ECB. So Imagine being Christine Lagarde, the president of the ECB. It would be a complete nightmare. What do? Do you increase interest rates to snuff out inflation and destroy Italy? If you destroy Italy, then Italy is out of the euro. Then the ECB ceases to exist because the ECB is the central bank of the euro. There will be no euro if Italy gets out. 3 trillion euros of debt will not be serviced. If that goes out, I'll tell you what will happen the next morning. Germany will reprint the Deutschmark and will leave the euro. And then what happens to the European Central Bank? So, this is the conundrum they are facing. There are ways of dealing with it. And we can discuss it if you want. But the politics has been toxified so much by this combination of socialism for the financiers and austerity for everybody else that we really don't have governments capable of doing anything. They're scared of their own shadows. I mean, look at Germany. At least Angela Merkel used to be a strong leader. Now, do you know who the Chancellor of Germany is? Yeah, okay, somebody who called Olaf Scholz.
Olaf Scholz,
but nobody knows anything about him. Yeah, all right, sure. But, the less he says, the better, right? Emmanuel Macron is great on grandstanding, but he's the president of a deficit country. So if you're presiding over a deficit country attached to a surplus country like Germany, which is leaderless, there's not much that you can do. So we're now suffering the nemesis out of 13 years of this hubris of refloating finance without reforming or forming a proper investment strategy.